Molly here. I usually do a pretty detailed recap and then we do a review of the episode. But since this episode was pretty much 46 minutes of callbacks, I'm going to do a brief recap and then just dive into the review. So here we go with the brief recap of Disney Doctor Who Season 2, Episode 3, The Well, written by Russell Davies and Sharma Angel Wallfall. Picking up where the arc left off, Belinda and the Disney Doctor are unable to return to Earth. So they're bouncing off and using the triangulation device, the Vindicator, to get coordinates so they can get the TARDIS to May 24th, 2025. This bounce, they land 500,000 years in the future. The TARDIS is on a spaceship, which happens regularly, so nothing out of the ordinary there. The Disney Doctor and Belinda dress accordingly, go out of the TARDIS onto the spaceship, and end up doing a space jump with the ship's crew to the planet below. So they dive to the planet, get the Vindicator reading, and then learn they are stuck there for the next 5 hours. The Disney Doctor gets himself put in charge by using his psychic paper. It's a dead planet, but there is a mercury mine there that went silent. So the ship's crew is there to check it out. They go inside the mine base and everyone is dead except for the deaf cook. Everyone knows sign language except Belinda, and we learn that it's actually illegal not to know it. But they also have this projector device that converts their words to text on their chest in order to get around having to sign everything. Of course, I question why the TARDIS can translate spoken language, but not sign language, but I'm sure someone would give me a made-up excuse about how the TARDIS works, so whatever. My question is why 500,000 years in the future, deafness hasn't been cured. But whatever, again, it's clear this is a virtue signal, which we will discuss later in the review. Anyway, the deaf woman, Alice, has something on her back, which sounds very familiar. This planet has a mine going down 5 miles. The Disney Doctor realizes the planet is Midnight, which he's been to before, and we even get a clip of David Tennant and the Midnight episode. The creature behind Alice kills one of the crew. 2 of the males mutiny against the Disney Doctor and their commander. They get killed and get a bunch of their fellow crewmates killed as well. The Disney Doctor realizes it's a mercury mine and addresses the entity behind Alice, which felt so much like Matt Smith's hide. The Disney Doctor says, if that thing behind you always gets destroyed, what if that thing behind you is you? Which I still don't really quite understand, but whatever. Then the Disney Doctor has the crew's leader shoot 2 mercury pipes to create a mirror effect. The creature had broken all the mirrors, so the mercury will cause the creature to see itself. Which kind of reminded me of the angels, the weeping angels in Blink, not being able to look at each other. So the mercury flows, and then an invisible force pushes Alice forward, and they all run away. The Disney Doctor stops in the hall because he wants to see it. We see a shadow and hear growling, and the Disney Doctor and Belinda take off running again. This made no sense because the Disney Doctor had already said that he and Belinda were going to have to hurry because they were stupid and took off their jump gear when they arrived, and were going to have to be quick in order to get it back on and get out the airlock before the creature catches up with them. So, of course, the creature has now attached itself to Belinda. She can hear it whispering, which apparently is what drives people crazy, and why Alice herself didn't go crazy because she couldn't hear it. So the crew leader shoots Belinda just above the heart. The creature attaches itself to the crew leader, and the crew leader runs to the mine shaft and jumps. The rest of the crew revive Belinda. On the spaceship, one of the remaining crew reports to her superior about what happened, and her superior turns out to be Mrs. Flood. In the TARDIS, Belinda is worried because, contrary to what the Disney Doctor has told her, no one they just encountered had ever heard of the Earth or humans. The TARDIS dematerializes, and the crew member who had been reporting to Mrs. Flood runs into the hallway and encounters another member of the ship's crew. The other crew member acts like she saw something on the first crew member's back, just like in Turn Left. The episode ends with whispering, heavily implying the creature is on the ship. The end. Okay, well, I could have made this episode just using clips of old episodes, which is why this is better than what we've seen in a long time, because it's nothing but stitched together scenes from a better time. And this was just either them copying themselves, or this is AI generated mining of past episodes, because I saw shades of blink, turn left. Obviously, Midnight was in there because they actually used a clip from that, and this was the planet Midnight. Saw the Satan's Pit. I saw Hide, the music from Rose, and the use of Britney Spears' Toxic from End of the World. I'm sure there was more that I missed, but I'm just so irritated by this I can barely think straight. So in a way, this was also the worst episode I've seen in a while, because it was a Frankenstein's monster of pieces of other episodes stitched together to trick you into thinking you're watching something better than it actually is. That ending, with the creature clearly having escaped the planet on that ship, this just felt like Black Mirror. And I'm not watching Black Mirror. This is supposed to be Doctor Who, although Disney Doctor Who. What the hell was this? The pieces were all there for this to be a decent episode, but unfortunately they were all stolen pieces. And then you get back to the virtue signaling with the deaf woman, and there was so much about that that didn't make sense. This was not good. Like I said, in a way, it's the best and the worst we've seen in a long time.
The opening credits here had Russell Davies and that other person listed as the writers. But like I said with Robot Revolution, it would not surprise me if Stephen Moffat either wrote part of this or slid notes to Russell Davies on what to use, because this, yet again, with the it's right behind the person you're looking at type weird puzzle, that's a Stephen Moffat signature. It really, really is.
When I looked up who wrote this on IMDb, it actually just said that Sharma Angel Walthall. Like, Russell Davies wasn't even listed as a writer on this. But obviously on the title screen, he's listed as a writer, and I wonder if that's because he wrote Midnight. And when I looked up this new writer, Sharma Angel Walthall, it says that she's a big fan of Russell Davies. So it's entirely possible that she just farmed old Doctor Who episodes from Davies' era, and even from Stephen Moffat's era, and that she stitched this together and wrote this episode all on her own. That's a possibility. Like I said, I think there's also the possibility that this was AI generated and she just filled in the blanks. But it's clear that this was stuff taken from other episodes. I mean, Midnight, most definitely, they were up front. They even showed you that clip of David Tennant. So I don't even know what to say at this point.
It had a bit of Waters of Mars, too.
Yeah.
To give credit, because there was stuff in this episode that I actually can give compliments to. Last week, I mentioned the question of, can these people, meaning the people making Disney Doctor Who right now, can they take the material seriously? And I don't remember hearing any snarky jokes or meta humor in this, so I'm giving them credit. They at least took this episode seriously. So I'm giving credit there. And the atmosphere of the episode, it did have a very horror-like feel to it. There was somebody in our comments last week who mentioned in reply to Molly, or maybe it was just in reply to somebody mentioning, last week's episode felt like it was a mix of science fiction and fantasy, and I don't really care for that. I think Molly doesn't really care for that. But this commenter said, yeah, but Doctor Who doing science fiction and horror and linking them together, that goes all the way back to the classic era, and that tends to work better. And they did do that here. So I'm giving credit for that too. At least it felt like a Doctor Who episode, and there were pieces of this that I actually could see being a Doctor Who episode, including Ncuti Gatwa. For the second week in a row, there was a large portion of this episode where he felt like he was the Doctor, at least to me. But I agree with you, there was virtue signaling all over the place. Not only was the deaf cook a major part of the story, which, by the way, I actually think she was a decent actress, and in a different setting, a different time period, what was this, like 500,000 years in the future? If this was a different setting where you wouldn't have the questions of, well, why can't they cure that if we're 500,000 years in the future, or give them some sort of prosthetic that would allow them to hear? But if we just imagine this was set in a different time period, this actress was actually pretty good, and she was doing a decent job delivering her lines to make it spooky and spookier when the story was unfolding. So I did like the actress. In fact, the actress who played the leader of this squad, at first I didn't like her when they first introduced it because she was kind of a grumpy person. But after a while, I started going, hey, this is one of the better characters they've made in quite a while. But then there was the idea of this squad was consisting of, I think it was 50, well, it wasn't even 50-50. It was like 60-40 female to male, which is fine, by the way. No problem with that. But then the one subordinate that was turning on the leader asked for somebody to back him up. And it was another male that backed him up. So the people that were going to do the relieving of duty...
It was a mutiny. Or
the two males. Yeah, let's just relieve the commander, no problem. Because I asked Molly, I didn't have a problem with the one male they set up as being kind of the jerk of the group. But when he asked for a seconded opinion, there were still plenty of females there. Why didn't they have one of the female squad members say, yeah, I'll back you up?
I minded it because if he has a history of behaving that way and being insubordinate, what the hell was he even doing on this mission? That was inappropriate. Utterly inappropriate. If I'd been in charge of that mission, I would not have taken that guy to that planet with me. I just would not have.
Well, he was a cardboard villainy type person.
Yeah.
His rationale made no sense.
Yeah. So again, that really took me out of it because he was acting ridiculously in a way that in a setting like that you wouldn't get away with. He wouldn't have been there if that's what his personality was. He just wouldn't have been.
And for the second week in a row, Belinda was likable.
Yeah.
And honestly, in Robot Revolution, I thought she was likable if you cut out those schizophrenic moments. Mm-hmm. I think this could be a good companion.
Yeah.
She could be if she was given better stuff to work with.
And I'll be honest, I don't even really mind the Doctor being flamboyant. As long as he's not out there trying to... That behavior he displayed when he was with Rogue, and he just completely forgot all about Ruby and the danger that she was in. That was inappropriate. I've never seen a Doctor out there chasing tail and ignoring the danger to the other people around him. That was crazy. You know, so it's not even that the Doctor is gay that I had a problem with. It was the behavior in chasing after romance while other people were left in danger. I don't care, gay, straight, whatever. You don't do that. So that I found to be appalling behavior. So the fact that the Doctor is flamboyant, I don't even really mind that at this point because so many of the other Doctors have been a little bit out there. Like, you think about Pertwee and the outfit that he wore. That was quite the outfit. And then you think about, like, Colin Baker and that clown suit he had on. Not to mention the fact that he choked Perry right after he regenerated. I mean, that was something else. You know, so the Doctor being flamboyant at this point, it doesn't bother me. He's into clothing. Okay, well, you know what? I'll just admit this. I loved Belinda's outfit from the previous episode, that gorgeous yellow dress she was in. Beautiful. They're doing an outstanding job with the outfits, and it fit the time period. You know, so at least they were getting something right there. So that doesn't bother me in the least. So the fact that this episode, because he was using lines that previous Doctors had used from previous episodes, it went to show that I think that Ncuti Gatwa could pull off being the Doctor if he was given the proper lines to read.
Yeah, the previous Doctors, although they tended to have the same core personality, the traits that they exhibited, some were more serious than others. And yeah, if this Doctor has that energetic bend to him, that's just his regeneration's personality. I'm fine with that. In fact, I thought it was interesting because one of the things that we've been complaining about is the way Ncuti Doctor keeps calling people babe. And in this episode, they actually covered this, and it was very Doctor-ish. He mentioned it, and then one of the characters, I think it was that guy who mutinied, he said something like, well, I don't think it's appropriate you call me that. And then the Doctor did it again, and he was doing it on purpose to, like, stick his thumb in the eye of authority. And that feels like the Doctor in some iterations as well. So I actually liked it when he did that. Normally I don't like when he does that in general, but in that particular story element thing, that fit to what I think the Doctor would have done, which is to not take seriously somebody trying to assert authority without any real reasoning for why they should be in authority.
I'm of two minds on that, because on the one hand, you've got this sensitivity right now about calling people by the name that they want to be called by and not calling them by anything else, if that makes sense. And then on the other hand, you think back to Eccleston and his interactions with Mickey, aka Ricky, aka Mickey the Idiot. And he would say those things right to Mickey's face. So you're right. This is something that the Doctor would totally do based on past behavior. So, like I said, I'm of two minds of that, because on the one hand, it does fit in with past behavior. On the other hand, it doesn't really fit with the current narrative of sensitivities, sensibilities, what they're trying to push. So it's another schizophrenic moment where they're trying to have it both ways. And I don't think that they quite get where they're going wrong.
Along the same lines there, this episode had the Disney Doctor refer to Belinda a couple of times as Belle, and he did that last week too. I think he only did it once last week. I wish I knew what that missing scene was, because it still rubs me the wrong way when he just calls her by Belle instead of Belinda. When like 98% of the episode it's Belinda, then he throws out this Belle. What is that about? She doesn't seem to, I guess, acknowledge that he's changing the name, so there must have been some cutout scene somewhere where she said it was okay to call her Belle.
I would think so, but who knows?
So I enjoyed the feeling of this episode. It very much was a horror episode that slowly moved along, because that's another thing too. This episode wasn't running through anything. They took a very slow burn on what they were doing on this planet. And I enjoyed that. But the story idea about this thing being behind whoever it decided was the target, most of this episode it was that cook that they found, that just felt like a Stephen Moffat half-baked idea. When he did the Weeping Angel's return, and if you watched a recording of a weeping angel, it got in the corner of your eye and did something stupid, because I don't even know how to describe that. And that just smells of Stephen Moffat.
Well, don't discount Turn Left, because Donna had that beetle on her back, and the only way she could see it was when they lined up all those mirrors around her to reflect the energy back, whatever. But that felt like that to me. And maybe somebody can explain to me that ending with the reflection of the creature so it could see itself. I don't understand what happened. I really don't understand what happened.
Because you mentioned Blink and how this was similar to when the lonely assassins couldn't look at each other. And this was similar to that, because it seemed like they were trying to set up the idea that this entity destroyed all these mirrors in this episode. And so I think what the idea was going to be was that the Mercury, because it had a reflective surface on it, that this creature was going to see itself. And then somehow the rule of this episode is anything that's behind has to get destroyed. But then this creature was the thing destroying. When you think about it for more than 5 seconds, it falls apart what they were trying to do. And they didn't actually even state exactly how that's going to work. The next thing you know, they've zipped along and they were in that airlock or whatever. And I don't know what happened. What happened? How did that creature escape and get in that airlock? How do they hope to get away from that creature? I have no idea. I think it had something to do with reflection and the Mercury being reflective, and it would see itself behind itself and then it would kill itself. Again, shruggy guy, I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And it's sad, because I can think of better ways that could have been worked out, considering that the surface of that planet used to be diamond. It got trapped somehow in reflections, and when the diamond was gone, then it was loosed. But they never explicitly stated that. I also question, well, how many creatures were there? Was it just that one, or were there two? So that's another thing. And another thing I'll say about this is, why did we have to revisit Midnight? That episode, I felt, was a self-contained story that, sometimes it's good to have a mystery that you don't know the answer to.
I would have been okay with that if they would have done it some justice here. Why did Stephen Moffat bring back the Weeping Angels?
Because he had nothing else.
Blink was a standalone episode. For what it was fine. And then when he brought them back, he cheapened them, and to the point where we had that gigantic, ridiculous Statue of Liberty in a later iteration of it. And that's kind of what was going on here. I don't think this was as bad as that. See, I don't have a problem with them revisiting Midnight. I just wish they would have done it better. Because the follow-up would have been helpful to, like, help us understand a bit more what was going on that planet. Do you feel you've understood anything? Did this help fill in? So now when you go back and watch David Tennant's Midnight, it filled in a bit more of what was going on?
No. This actually made it so that I'm less likely to want to go back and rewatch that because it's tainted it. Knowing that this is how it turns out, what the hell was this?
Well, turned out, what happened here?
I have no idea what happened.
See,
it's loose from the planet now. It's on that ship, and it's going to go wreak havoc in the universe. I have no idea.
Because I would argue this didn't fill in anything. It didn't help me understand anything about the David Tennant episode, which to me is the only reason you should follow up and, hey, I'm going to make a part 2 to this, is I'm going to fill in some pieces. Well, what did you fill in? In Midnight, this thing was possessing a person, and it was able to echo back what people were saying, sometimes even like right at the same time they were saying it. Well, most of the episode, when at the same time they were saying it. And now in this episode, it was about being behind somebody and killing things behind you if you saw it. And again, I'm shruggy guy. When you watch this episode the first time through, it seems like it's a cool concept and that, oh my gosh, we're getting some layered coolness of storytelling. But then you watch it a second time and you're like, at least I was, well, there is no extra layer here. It's just a bunch of ideas that they had that could have been good ideas, but they never fully formed them. It was just kind of like, okay. I just wish they would have followed through and actually delivered a story here that I would immediately want to go back and watch Tennant's Midnight to try to gain some extra knowledge. And that's not what this episode did not need to be set on Midnight at all. And when we saw Mrs. Flood at the end of the episode, we both groaned. We are sick of this idea that he's pushing. We are sick of this prolonged arc that they're trying to push here, or Russell's trying to push, that I don't care how this resolves. In fact, we were making the joke when they were in that airlock and the doctor was saying, no, take me, go on my back and I'll show you the universe or something like that. And then we were joking, so what, is this going to be Sutekh all over again? Because remember, he was hanging out on the TARDIS for all those decades, and is this just going to be a repeat of that? What was going on there? The episode had elements that could have been really cool. I liked the actress who played the cook that they found. I liked her in a different setting, because I think the actress probably was really deaf in real life. I think. Somebody correct me, but I think. And the way they were communicating with those holographic panels in a different setting could have been a cool idea. There was a lot of good ideas here that they could have brought together and made a story of. But 500,000 years in the future, when you set something that far ahead in the future, I don't know, just that was not the right setting for doing what they did here.
Why couldn't they have just made her an alien and the sense of hearing is just not something that their species possesses?
Yep.
They could have just done that. They could have just made it a whole species that just doesn't hear. So this is a way for one species to try to communicate with another. That would have made a lot more sense. And of course, these aren't humans anyway. Well, yeah, but you know what? They're supposed to be the same species. And you're telling me a species that has space flight like they do, and they're mining other planets, they can't cure deafness? Okay.
Or have a better route to communicate with somebody who's deaf other than, well, everybody has to learn sign language. Really? You're going to learn sign language if you're 500,000 years in the future?
It was a virtue signal. Yeah, because it's like, well, which sign language you're going to be learning? American Sign Language? I doubt it.
Intergalactic. Remember, there's supposed to be a Eurovision Song Contest coming up here in a few episodes, so they probably got some sort of space sign language or something.
Oh my god, I bet that airs Eurovision weekend.
That's my guess, is what he's doing.
Oh, jeez.
And who knows, because of the content of what Eurovision Song Contest is, That might actually be a fun episode if they do it right, just to laugh along with the whole weekend of Eurovision or the whole week of Eurovision.
We'll just have to wait and see because, like I said, I wonder if that's going to mirror at all the Amazing Stories episode. Was it Miss Stardust or whatever it was? I don't remember. But there was an episode of Amazing Stories that I'm just going to have to wait and see if this Doctor Who episode has any resemblance to that. So...
Overall, what would I say as far as a recommendation? It depends on what you're looking for here. If you just want a standalone episode that you're watching for some spooky sci-fi setting things, this is not a horrible episode for that. On a scale of 1 to 10, this is probably a 5. And for me, the thing is, I think people are going to praise this episode because in any other era, other than Whittaker and Shudigatwa, this would be an average general episode where, yeah, it was okay, but there was nothing special about it. But because the episodes now are so bad, by comparison, this looks like it's a fantastic episode.
Until you realize that all of the good pieces are stolen from other episodes from the past. And for me, that says, you know what, don't bother watching this episode. Go back and watch those other episodes that I mentioned because they were better and they are full-length episodes of stories that are their stories and not this mishmash of stolen moments to try to make an episode.
Yeah, this felt like a clip show.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Yes, it did.
But if you just want to have an episode where it feels like it's Doctor Who, and in your case, you're defending your view on this by saying, yeah, it felt like Doctor Who because they took a bunch of stuff from previous episodes. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is, if somebody wants to watch an episode that feels like Doctor Who, in the Shooty era, this is probably a pretty good pick. Because even if it's taken from other episodes, at least it felt like a Doctor Who episode.
And like I said, to me, was it Varada Sethu, Belinda? That actress, I'm actually liking her as Belinda. I'm liking the character of Belinda, and I'm sorry that we're not getting better episodes for her to be in. And this also, with Shudigatwa having to basically just read off lines from previous Doctors, this also shows me that he could have done an okay job as the Doctor if he'd been given proper scripts.
That's the thing. That's what this episode does accomplish. So this episode had a good feeling to it as far as the setting and just how the episode was coming across to the viewer. Shudigatwa gave a decent performance. And the setting of the episode, even if it was borrowed moments, was still Doctor Who-like. So this narrative some people are putting out there saying, we've got some Doctor Who fatigue, that people are just tired of Doctor Who, that there's just nothing more to say. This shows that's not true because there were elements here. The episode was working in a way that kept us interested. Because I'll be honest, I was interested the whole 48 minutes or whatever this was. So they can make Doctor Who in 2025. This episode shows they could. They just choose not to for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it's not just that it's ists and phobes rejecting the diverse cast. This shows that the diverse cast would be okay if the stories were better. It's the stories. The writing is garbage. Absolute garbage. And this time it was stolen stuff from other episodes that made this seem better than it was.
Well, and the virtue signaling.
Yes.
So
that goes with the writing, in my opinion.
That squad had a lot of female representation, which would have been fine, except when that mutiny was starting. I was not okay with that. That's virtue signaling when you do that. With all those female characters in that squad, I'm fine with one of the males wanting to mutiny, and then by just mathematical probability, one of the females should have said, yeah, I got your back on this. Why did it have to be another one of the males? That they could have kept the squad's breakdown, the ratio, male to female. They could have kept it exactly as it was. I didn't have a problem with that. What I did have a problem with is when they had this irrational mutiny starting, that they had to pick the males to be the mutineers. And that's what I had the problem with. If they just would have picked one of the females along with the male to be the mutineer, I would have been fine with the rest of that being a story element. But because they did that, that's a virtue signal. Males are evil. Males are the ones that clog up the works. And I'm not okay with that messaging. That is not good messaging to stick out there. I just wish they would have fleshed out more of the story so it wasn't just a cool idea of this thing that's behind you that you can't see is somehow, and I shruggy guy. I don't even know how to explain it. They tried to explain it like from multiple angles. It's always the thing behind you. At the ending, when the leader of that squad, because she was a sharpshooter or she was just really good at using her firearm.
So I think the point was to stop Belinda's heart so that that thing would attach to the crew leader. So I think she shot her right above the heart, but was enough to get her heart to stop. And then it was just a simple mend the bullet hole and get her heart started again.
I don't know. I don't know. And the ending there where there was the thing escaped anyway, then it made this whole episode pointless. Mm-hmm. Because this episode, what it felt like to me was the John Carpenter 1982 Thing movie. That's what it felt like to me. That instead of being up, what was it, the Arctic or Antarctic? I forget where that movie was set. They were on this planet with this group of people and this thing. Instead of being a shapeshifter that could turn into anybody, it was this thing that could attach itself to anybody. Because at the end there, when they were in that airlock thing, they were all debating, well, I don't think it has me. Does it have you? I don't know. Does it have you? And that just felt like James Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. Now, again, that's not a bad thing to borrow from, but when I don't understand what the story concept is, and then you add Mrs. Flood, I don't know. This episode I should have liked, but I didn't. And I honestly can't figure out why, other than, like Molly mentioned, it was borrowed pieces. That's the only thing that makes any sense to me, because I should have liked this. They took it seriously. There was a method to what they were trying to do. It felt like they were trying to tell a story here and not just have fun with the material. This should have been an episode I would have liked. It should have been. And I kind of liked it. That's why I'm giving it a 5. 5 out of 10 is average. That's a pretty good ranking for me. This is probably the best of the Shooty era, in my opinion. Because previously last season, Dot and Bubble I liked about 20 minutes of. And 73 Yards, I liked, I don't know, what would we say, 70, 75% of it?
Yeah.
This whole episode I liked, in quotation marks, but something just felt off. But I think it was the best of the Shooty era.
Wasn't there an episode of Red Dwarf where they had to kill Lister to get some creature to let him go? And then they had to revive him? I think there was. Because they, chopped off his hand. So, I mean, this is just, I've seen this before. It felt very just generic and recycled.
If somebody wants to watch this, they won't have a bad time. At least I don't think they'll have a bad time.
Only if you expect the end to make sense.
Or an original story.
Yeah.
But it's not bad. Like I said, I think it's the best of the Shooty era. He felt like the Doctor for most of the episode. And Belinda was likable. And there was this setting on the planet that felt like a Doctor Who episode.
Yep.
So I think I'm recommending this episode. I'm giving it going into it, knowing that you're going to get recycled material, but this is the first time it's felt like an entire Doctor Who episode to me. And I think this did feel like a Doctor Who episode to me. I agree with what you're saying. There was a Black Mirror aspect to it. But again, that's what Stephen Moffat, his run, always felt like more Black Mirror than it did Doctor Who. But I know a lot of people like Stephen Moffat, so I'm just going to let that go. That's a personal preference of mine.
Because it kind of reminded me of The Rebel Flesh as well. I don't know if Moffat wrote that, but that was during his era. It felt like a lot of older Doctor Who. I mean, the 2005 run. That's what this felt like. So if you like that atmosphere, and like the old man said, you're okay with the recycled stories, and you're okay with the end not really making sense and feeling like Black Mirror. And I would also add, if you're okay with the virtue signaling, because there was definitely some in there, then yeah, you might actually enjoy this, at least just for the atmosphere. And it did have a feeling like it was that era of Doctor Who. However, if you want an original story and you want it to make sense at the end, then I would say this isn't for you.
Yeah, I think that's the best we can give them as far as a recommendation. If you're going to watch one of the Shooty Who episodes for an entire 48 minutes, probably this one, because the rest of them have been, 70% this, 50% this. Nah, this one's 100%, but there's stuff in there that's going to be like, okay, what's this? What's this? And you're not getting a real follow-up to Midnight. You're not learning anything new about Midnight. They brought it up, but then you didn't learn anything new. So why set it on that same planet if you're not going to, other than like an Easter egg, why set it on that same planet if you're not going to follow up and give us more information about what happened in the David Tennant episode? Because this also felt like Waters of Mars to me, too.
Mm-hmm.
I think I like that episode better than you did. I think we talked about that last night.
Yeah, because I really... And the end of Waters of Mars I didn't care for. Because obviously the Doctor went too far, and that woman ended up having to fix history, shall we say. So I really didn't care for the end of that one. And this one, like I said, if you like the atmosphere, then you know what? Give it a shot. But if you aren't happy with just the recycled stuff and feeling like you're watching a Clips show, but with new actors, then don't watch this.
And if you do watch this and you like it, just keep in mind all the narratives out there about, well, so much time has passed, they just can't make Doctor Who anymore. It's a burned out franchise. It doesn't have to be burned out. It's because of these writers, Chibnall, Moffat, Davies. They all hung out together. And you're just getting the same vision of Doctor Who for 20 years. The same vision of Doctor Who for 20 years. That's what's burnt out, is that vision, that shared vision that those three have. What they need to do is grab somebody who's not affiliated with those three at all. Never worked under them, never affiliated with them, and has a different vision for Doctor Who. Then I think Doctor Who could move forward. This shows that it could happen. This wasn't a perfect episode, but it showed when they take the material seriously that they could do some stuff. So if you do watch this and you like it, just imagine if we had a writer that wasn't tied to those three people. Just imagine what could happen here. I don't think Doctor Who has to die, but it's going to die because Russell Davies drive this bus right into the side of a mountain. And then I don't know if you can resurrect it after that.
I don't know. A lot of things are really up in the air right now. So, that being said, that's all I have to say about that. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next week.
Take care.